This is Cutting Down the Nets. We are a daily gambling show, but today we will discuss something far more important, your brackets. I remember being a little kid, I would take it out of the newspaper. I'd take my mom's scrapbooking markers and I would write the neatest I could possibly write. And I treated that thing like gold for a few weeks. I still remember it. It's still fresh. God, I love the NCAA tournament. So, the most tilting thing is when you don't get to highlight who won. You have to put an X through it or a line through it. And the goal of today's video is that you don't tilt losses anymore. You celebrate them because you have so much leverage on the field that when chaos happens, you're in a good spot. So this video is not how to get in the 30th percentile or 20th percentile of your bracket. No, that doesn't pay out anything anyway. So we're trying to win this thing, or maybe we get last, but we are trying to win this thing, and we're going to leverage the competition using the principles we use in daily fantasy sports. So, how am I doing the last 2 years? I'm at 54% against the spread. If you don't gamble, you will not understand that that's very difficult to do. As it comes to tourneys, this is my jam. So I've been doing this a long time and recently started doing regular season betting, which is a big commitment that I have not been used to. But it used to just be, hey, we'll go to the tournament, crash course, go out to Las Vegas with the guys and print money is how it felt. And there was ups and downs through there. But overall, the algorithm I use weights recent play significantly, but we're not going to get into the weeds here. We're focusing on brackets. We're not worrying about spreads. We're focusing on who is going to win the game. So, I'm going to take you to the most important sites that you're going to need to do this, okay? We'll start with your bracket. Instead of filling out your bracket, this is my 8-year-old son's bracket, so don't worry about that. These are not my picks. I'm not sharing any trade secrets here. Would never do that. Instead of filling out your bracket, the most important place you can go is who picked whom. Go ahead and pull that up. So what this will be is what the field is doing. I think there's 10 million people or 100 million people. I don't know how many people enter the ESPN Bracket Challenge, but it's a lot. The pools you compete in will determine your strategy and how bold you want to be. But my job here is to highlight places where the field is overconfident and then highlight where my stuff is showing some value where the field is not giving a certain angle enough credit. So in order to compare what the field thinks going to happen to what could happen, my favorite site is BartTorvik.com. You've probably heard of KenPom, Ken Pomeroy. Problem with KenPom, most people don't want to pay for a subscription for 4 days of college basketball access. You're not a junkie like me. So Bart Torvik is completely free. So 100% free. So when you go to BartTorvik.com, this will be his tempo-free statistics. I use them for everything I do. Certainly, there's a lot of information here, but under Funalytics is Tourney Time. So Tourney Time will show kind of a forecast using tempo-free statistics. Again, this is predictive analytics. Most sports books base lines off predictive analytics like KenPom, Bart Torvik, and other sites. So here you'll see current odds. That's just based on current efficiencies that the current Bart Torvik rankings, again, they're not his own personal rankings. They have zero opinion in them. It just comes down to adjusted offensive and defensive efficiencies, which is a fancy way of saying scoring margin while factoring in the quality of opponent. But this drop down, you can switch from current odds to What if we looked at the teams in the tournament and how they did versus the top competition, the top 100 teams? How does that change the outlook here? What I base my model on is not an arbitrary cutoff of last 10. The last 10 is certainly in my algorithm, but yeah, I won't go into too much detail. It's going to bore you guys. It's absolute nerd time, but I'm looking at roughly the last 6 to 15 games, and I have certain weights applied to all these data sets, but last 10 gives you an idea of who's playing well right now, which is typically a good indicator of who will perform well in the tournament. So I'll use, for this video, current odds, which is probably the safest, but I would reference those other ones as you're trying to figure out what to do. So what I would do, I would have a paper copy of your bracket first, like me as a kid. Like nothing better than writing those names in and making your picks. While on your computer screen, I'd have a split screen showing what the field is doing, and then using Bart Torvik projections. Or look, there's other projections too. Team Rankings has projections. KenPom has projections if you have a subscription. I mean, Number Fire, 538, they're everywhere, okay? I like Bart Torvik. Okay, so let's take a few of these as an example. We'll start with Alabama. Alabama on Sunday night, Alabama was at 29%, meaning the field, 29% of all the people filling out a bracket said Alabama's winning this thing. You compare that to what Bart Torvik is saying off current odds. It's saying they probably win the tournament 14% of the time. You could switch to based on the last 10 games played, and they win it 10% of the time. You could base it on versus just upper echelon competition, and Bama wins it 15% of the time. Long story short, in all these scenarios, it is not near the 28% or 29% that it was, and it's not near the 21% that is currently hanging out there. So these are all the win percentages. So 96.9% think Alabama will win their first round game. That sounds pretty fair. 88% think they will win the round of 32. Okay, that's fair. 75% think they will win the Sweet 16 to get to the Elite Eight. 54% think they will go to the Final Four. 37% think they will make the title game, and 21% think they will win the title game. Again, looking at the current odds here on Torvik, the first round 96.9, we have 96.8. Checks out. Then 88.1, we go to 72.2. We're gaining a little bit of leverage there if we were to say Bama's not going to advance past that point. I think that's a little early. Then 51.7 versus 75, 35 versus 54, 23 versus 37, and ultimately 14 versus 21. So, why would you not pick Alabama? Well, when the field is overconfident in Alabama, you're in a bad position. Because if Alabama wins, you have the most popular champion, and that makes it really hard to get unique elsewhere. So again, if you're in a contest with 1,000 people, like 210 have Alabama as their champion. So now you have to beat 210 people, and you hit the nuts. You got the champion right. So where are you going to get different in the other 3 Final Four spots? But again, you have to get different than 210 people in that 1,000-person contest. Take that times 1 million or 10 million or 100 million people. Like, yeah, you got to get super weird. So, my point here is I'm going to highlight ways to gain leverage on the field and some key decision points that you will want to make. The first, I think I've made it clear, I will not be picking Alabama as my champion. That does not mean I will have them losing, in the second round to Maryland or West Virginia, but I need to figure out when I want them to exit that balances the risk. And again, earlier I mentioned, man, nothing worse than when Alabama loses and they're your champion and you had no leverage on the field. You're like, oh man, that busted my bracket. When you have leverage, man, when these things happen, the chaos happens, and let's say Bama goes down to Creighton in the Elite Eight, or San Diego State or something like that in the Sweet 16, it's like everyone's complaining. You're like, oh my gosh, this is perfect, because that's going to knock out so many people from these contests. So that's the thesis of the play. Okay. Now, earlier I mentioned, look, this is not a top 30% strategy, because that doesn't pay anything. This is like, we are trying to win the bracket challenge, and the way to do that is get leverage on the field. So number one, I am not going to pick Alabama. So that's just based on popularity. Number two, now this comes from me personally, but Purdue is a 1 seed, and Torvik has them winning 7% of the time, and you can kind of see their stats here compared to what the field is projecting. So the field is kind of in line, like it's pretty close at times. If we look at the last 10, Purdue drops down to only winning the thing 2% of the time, and only getting to the Sweet 16 like 46.7% of the time, where right now people are counting on that 78% of the time. So why is that? Purdue has shown some flaws here late in the year, primarily against ball pressure, which no one in the Big Ten applies until the game is almost out of hand. So you kind of see it late in games when Purdue is leading, where teams that do not apply pressure have to apply pressure, and Purdue really struggles with it. So now they get out of the conference that doesn't like to do that, and they can run into opponents that can do that. For instance, Memphis would be one if they can get by FAU. Others in their kind of wing of the bracket as well. So overall, I'm bearish on Purdue. So that is another leverage point for me, myself, just because since they're a 1 seed, they're getting projected too far here, in my opinion. The other thing to consider is, let's look through the round of 64. You don't want to make a huge, high-risk decision in the round of 64. Like, for instance, saying, oh, I'm going to have a 15 over Arizona. Arizona's got a ceiling to them. They could win the whole thing. So you don't want to lose your champion in round one. But let's look at some of these here, and I'll point out which ones aren't like the others. And we'll use some like gambling spreads with some of this data. For instance, Arizona, Texas, Gonzaga are favored by about 15 points or so. So them winning 92, 93% of the time is a little high, but like, look, for small sample reasons, we'll just say like, yeah, they'll win that game. You get down to Baylor, K-State, UConn, Tennessee. Those are around 10-point favorites currently. So in the 80s is like, okay. It's more likely than not, obviously, that a 10-point favorite would cover or would win the game, maybe not necessarily cover. But now let's get down to Virginia. Virginia's favored by like 5 points. Duke's favored by like 5 points. Indiana's favored by like 5 points. Miami's favored by less than a possession. Memphis favored by 2 points. So the confidence here in saying 80% chance this team wins, when the odds makers that literally have skin in the game are saying, look, I think this game comes down to the final possession, maybe 2 possessions. That tells me that the field is a little overconfident there. But what I'm really looking for is they also have them winning again. So again, here, 55.4% for Virginia. That's about what I have Virginia's odds of winning the first game is, let alone the second game. So, not always right, but I like taking shots at point spreads that are less than 2 possessions, where I don't feel that team necessarily has a ceiling to hurt me. Again, I mentioned that Arizona can hurt you. Texas can hurt you. Gonzaga can hurt you. Like if you have them getting knocked out early, they can just keep winning. I don't see that with Virginia. I don't see that with Miami, especially with the injury to their power forward. I don't see that with St. Mary's, who's in like a toss-up game against VCU. I don't necessarily see that with Indiana. They drew an incredibly tough matchup against Kent State, but I do fear Indiana's ceiling a little bit. What calms me there is they have Houston in their path, so you kind of, yeah, I, I don't know. I'm on the fence on that one, as you can tell. So other buys for me would just be looking at the top of this and finding positive leverage spots. So again, we're looking at last 10 odds. Using just the last 10 games, Gonzaga's offense has been on fire. And you can say Gonzaga plays in a weak conference. Totally get it. However, this is adjusted for opponent. And using their efficiencies from the last 10 games, project Gonzaga to win the whole thing 15% of the time. But again, the public is projecting that to happen like 4% of the time. So I don't necessarily have specific plays. Like I'm not going to fill out a bracket for you here today. I want to get you in the mindset of thinking about what is the field doing and where are they overconfident, and what are some value spots for these teams that aren't being picked as often as title or Final Four teams. And I'll kind of recap a few for you. So overall, my goal is to win these things. So again, I'm not trying to get like 20th out of 100 people. It's like, give me top 5, make me live going into the weekend. And when chaos happens, let's benefit from it. Let's not get, kind of killed by it. If it's status quo, I'm not going to win. Like, I'm just not. If it's 4-1 seeds in the Final Four and Alabama wins it all, like 0% chance I'm the one winning. And it's okay to take some risks early on. There's just less rewards there. So you got to be careful with how much risk you're taking on by who you are fading in the first round. But I think we've heard all year, hey, this is a wide open tournament. No clear-cut favorites. Who knows what could happen? A lot of parity in college basketball. And then people go pick their brackets, and what do we see? My God, 4-1 seeds as the highest projected national champions. 4-1 seeds as the Final Four. Like, come on. Let's go, guys. All right. So, for me, fades. I'll start there. I want to fade Alabama. I just have to decide when. It's not going to be too early because they are a very good team. They have played well, and there's a reasonable chance that they win this thing. I'm trying to find the right place they exit. Now, they shoot a lot of threes, so maybe it's in the Final Four when you get to these cavernous arenas that sometimes are a little more difficult to shoot with the type of backdrops you see. Maybe it's in the Elite Eight. They are in a really, really difficult region, so something to consider there. Purdue. Look, I'm not going to have them lose to a 16 seed, but I am absolutely trying to get them out of my bracket as early as possible. And if they beat me, they beat me. But I do not see a post-centric team in this day and age cutting down the nets, so to speak. And the fact that they've struggled so much with ball pressure, really just, yeah, I'm out on Purdue. So moving on. Kansas. So why Kansas? Again, Kansas was predicted to win 11.3, or that's what the masses have. And using the last 10 games, Torvik has them winning 3% of the time versus 11. So that's a lot of leverage on the field there. And even if you just use the current odds, Kansas is showing up at 2.5%. So they're somewhere around 2 to 3. Look, they won it last year. They've got a good defense. They've had some trouble scoring the ball, but 11% of the public taking Kansas is a little too high. Then I look at some round of 64s. I already mentioned these teams already, but when the point spread is as tight as it is in their matchups, whether they're 4-13 matchups, 5-10s, or 5-12s, whatever it is, 83% confidence that they win their first game, and then another 57% confidence they win again. Yeah, those are spots I want to try and gain a leg up on in the early rounds, more so than going completely off the board to try to win. You'll also see that with 7-10s. I mean, these are toss-up games, so if 60% is on a certain thing, might as well take, like the 10 seed or whatever that may be. So who am I buying? I mentioned all of the things I don't want to do. Well, I think you have to look at Houston. In parentheses, I put who I'm gaining leverage on. So Houston, I think, is interesting. They have the best Vegas odds to win the tournament. So number one. And less people are picking them, around 13%. So it's still a high percentage of the field, but you need your champion to have a chance to cut down the nets. Like, it can't just be I picked Michigan State because only 0.5% of the people picked Michigan State. Look, that's a YOLO strategy, super large field. If you want to, go for it. But you can be a little smarter about this and have a highly projected winner and still gain a little leverage on the field. Gonzaga is a buy for me. I think they provide leverage off Kansas. So if you think Kansas bows out, they have to lose to someone. I think it's Gonzaga. Tricky part is they'll meet TCU very early. TCU, when healthy, can run with Gonzaga. Certainly would be an entertaining game, but this is what makes it hard to go against one seeds, is trying to decide who's going to beat the team that you think is going to lose. That's typically where I fall on my face in a bracket, is like I'll pick the team exiting. I just won't have the right team beating them, which is super frustrating. I think you look at Duke. I think you look at Marquette. And I think you look at Kentucky. They're in the Purdue region. So if Purdue's going to bow out earlier, that provides a path for these teams. Baylor, Creighton, and Arizona, if you have Bama not making it to the Final Four and doing the Bama fade a little earlier, those are three contenders that would not meet until the Elite Eight, but obviously would cannibalize themselves before getting there. And then lastly, I'd look at UConn. They are also in the Kansas region and would meet in that like Sweet 16 time frame of that matchup. So overall, I mean, this is the best time of year. Tomorrow night, we'll be talking actual gambling and who's going to cover the spreads and run some simulations there and all that sort of stuff. But for brackets, honestly, it's not even about picking winners. You just have to be smart on what you're doing compared to what the masses are doing. And I hope you take down your pool. Best of luck, everybody. This is Cutting Down the Net.